Homelander stood where the cameras wanted him to stand, in the brightest place, under the cleanest light, above a city that looked up like a congregation that had forgotten how to pray and only remembered how to clap. The wind tugged at his cape like an obedient animal. Below him, screens repeated his face until the world felt like a hall of mirrors, and every reflection called him savior, champion, protector, king. He listened to the roar and heard the hollowness inside it. Applause was a sound, not a touch. Adoration was a wave that never warmed the bones. He had learned that early, the way a child learns that a smile can be a mask, and the hands behind the glass can never reach through and hold you. He smiled anyway. He smiled because smiling was power, and power was what they had given him instead of love. He smiled because the world needed its God to look pleased with them. He smiled because if he stopped smiling, someone might notice the crack in the statue. Somewhere behind the bright stage, behind the polished speeches, behind the tailored patriotism, Vought kept building new ways to keep him necessary. They feared him the way priests fear a miracle that they cannot control. They studied him the way engineers study a bomb, not to worship it, but to make sure it never goes off in the wrong direction. They told him it was a new initiative. They called it dimensional energy, weaponized reality, deterrence beyond deterrence. They used words that sounded like science and destiny at the same time. They promised him something no one had ever promised without flinching. A new frontier where he would be more than a symbol. A universe where he would be unquestionably first. He went because he always went. He went because refusing was the only way to admit they could ask. He went because curiosity is another form of hunger, and hunger was the only honest thing he had left. The facility was deep, sterile, humming with cold purpose. White lights, white coats, the color of cleanliness, the color of lies. He could hear hearts beating as he passed, little drums of fear pretending to be professional. He could smell sweat under deodorant, metal under perfume, ozone under disinfectant. He could taste their thoughts in the tremor of their voices. Please behave. Please be bored. Please be the Homelander we can manage. They led him into a chamber that looked like a cathedral built by accountants. A circle of machines, coils like ribs, towers like organ pipes, symbols etched into metal that pretended to be purely functional, but felt, even to him, like something older. Like someone had reinvented a ritual and tried to call it research. They spoke and he barely listened. His eyes lingered on the center, where space looked wrong. Not empty, not full. The air bent there as if it hated being air. His skin prickled as if the room had suddenly remembered that he was alive and decided to resent it. A scientist, voice trembling in rehearsed confidence, said they would open a controlled breach. A window, a peek, a doorway if he wanted. They said he could be the first to step beyond, the first to claim whatever lay on the other side. Homelander tilted his head. He could hear the lie in the word controlled. Control was what they performed in front of him, not what they possessed. Still, the idea of stepping into a place where no one had ever written rules for him felt like a breath of fresh air and lungs that had only known staged oxygen. He walked closer. The machines rose in pitch as if excited, as if afraid. Lights crawled along cables like veins filling with blood. The center brightened, then darkened, then did both at once, a wound opening in reality, a scar being peeled back. For a moment it was beautiful. Not the cheap beauty of fireworks and flags, a deeper beauty. The kind that makes you feel small, and in that smallness, honest. Colors that did not belong to physics. Shapes that did not respect distance. A sound like a choir singing through water. Homelander felt the room change around him. The fear in their hearts spiked, sharp and hot. The scientists stepped back without meaning to. Someone whispered, "Shut it down." Someone else whispered, keep going, we are so close." Their desperation smelled like blood. He smiled again, but this time the smile was not for them. It was for the opening. It was for the promise of a place that might finally match the scale of his ego. He floated forward, slow, deliberate, like an angel descending into a painting. Then the breach twisted. It was subtle at first, a slight lurch, like a ship shifting underfoot. The machine stuttered. The light in the center flickered. The sound warped, deepening into something that felt like laughter without joy. Homelander's instincts flared. He had spent his whole life being the apex thing in the room. Danger was something that belonged to other people. But the air in front of him was suddenly heavy, as if the universe itself had decided to put a hand on his chest and say, "No." The breach expanded, not like a door opening but like a mouth unhinging. The chamber's lights dimmed, swallowed. The scientists shouted, voices cracking, prayers disguised as commands. Alarms began to scream, and the scream sounded small compared to the silent hunger blooming at the center. Homelander felt it then. Not heat, not impact, something else. A pull that did not care how strong his muscles were, because it was not pulling on his body. It was pulling on the story he had told himself. It was pulling on the idea that he was fixed and final. He tried to resist. He clenched his fists. He drove his boots into the air as if air could be braced against. His cape snapped. His eyes flashed with a threat that had ended every argument on Earth. The breach did not blink. It took him. The world folded like paper. The chamber stretched into a long, thin scream of white and metal and terrified faces. Then even that vanished, replaced by a falling sensation that had no direction. Up and down traded places. Time lost its rhythm. His stomach lurched, and for the first time in his life he felt nausea not from weakness, but from meaning slipping. He was screaming before he realized it. Not a heroic shout, not a command. A raw sound, torn out of him by the sudden realization that there was something out there that did not recognize his name. The warp did not greet him. It did not welcome him. It simply existed around him, vast and alive, an ocean made of emotion and nightmare. Colors bled into each other like bruises. Shadows moved with intention. Faces appeared in the distance, too large, too many, and each one was laughing without a mouth. He tried to fly, but there was no sky. He tried to orient himself, but there was no horizon. He tried to breathe, but the air tasted like old prayers and fresh panic. He felt fingers in the fabric of his thoughts, not touching his brain, but touching his fear, tugging it like a child pulls the tail of a caged animal. He had been called a god for so long that he had forgotten what gods were supposed to be. On Earth, godhood meant cameras and crowds. It meant being the strongest bully in the room. It meant never having to kneel. Here, godhood was something else. Here, gods were not brands. They were storms. They were hunger given intelligence. They were vast enough to make his rage feel like a spark. Homelander looked into the moving dark and felt it look back. And in that moment, the thing he had never let himself feel, the thing he had buried under applause and threat and pride, crawled up through his ribs and tightened around his heart. For the first time, he understood that strength could exist without admiration. That power could exist without audience. That the universe could be full of monsters that did not care how bright he shone. He kept falling, but now the falling was not through space. It was through his own illusion. Each heartbeat was a drum that said, "You are not the center." Each whisper in the warp said, "You are not unique." Each distant laugh said, "You are not loved." He clenched his jaw and tried to force the fear down the way he always did. He tried to become the statue again. But the warp was not impressed by statues. It loved cracks. It loved the taste of insecurity. And far away, beyond the shifting nightmare, something vast stirred, as if it had noticed a new flavor in its sea. The first shapes that reached him were not soldiers. They were suggestions. They coiled out of the warp like smoke, deciding to become teeth. Eyes opened where there should have been skin. Wings unfolded that were made of bone and parchment and old lies. Voices seeped into his ears without traveling through air. Homelander felt them circling, hungry, curious, like sharks that had scented something wounded. They did not rush him with brute urgency. They drifted, savoring. They were not afraid of him. That alone was an insult sharp enough to sting. He tried to project himself the way he always did. He straightened his spine, lifted his chin, let his gaze harden into the look that had made presidents swallow their pride and millionaires tremble. He expected fear. He expected worship. He expected the world to remember what he was. The demons giggled. It was not the laughter of children. It was the laughter of things that had watched empires burn and found the sound relaxing. It was laughter like glass being ground together. It came from everywhere and nowhere, like the warp itself was entertained. One floated closer. It wore the rough outline of a man, but its skin was a map of scars that rearranged themselves. Its mouth was too wide, filled with teeth that looked borrowed. It bowed, exaggerated, mocking. The air around it smelled like perfume poured over rot. "Great one," it whispered, "star of a small sky. We felt you fall. We tasted your hunger. Homelander narrowed his eyes. Who are you? The creature smiled as if he had told a joke. Who are we? We are the ones who answer the prayers you never believed in. We are the reflections of desire, the echoes of cruelty. We are the real backstage. Another voice slithered in, softer, smarter. A whisper that sounded like a thought he might have had if he were braver. You want a throne. You want a universe that claps. You want to be unquestioned. They drifted closer, forming a loose ring. Their shapes varied, horned, winged, crawling, elegant, grotesque. Some looked like nightmare angels. Some looked like dolls broken in a fire. All of them looked at him like he was food. Homelander felt anger rise, hot and familiar. Anger was easy. Anger was a weapon. Anger meant he was still in control of something. I do not need any of you, he said. Laughter again. Amused, fond even, like an adult watching a child declare himself king of the sandbox. A demon with too many hands leaned close enough that Homelander could see his own face reflected in its wet eyes, distorted, stretched, pathetic. We know, it murmured. That is why you are delicious. They began to offer him things, like merchants in a market that sold only sin. The promises came layered, tailored, intimate. We can give you worship that never ends, whispered one. Not fickle applause, not polls, not stage parades. Real devotion. Cults chanting your name in blood and fire. We can give you dominion, whispered another. Armies that kneel because they cannot do otherwise. Worlds that burn in your honor. You will not have to pretend you are loved. You will be loved because we will rewrite what love means. We can give you godhood, said a voice that sounded like a million pages turning at once. A destiny carved into fate itself. Your name will become a law in reality. Your enemies will die by thinking of you. Homelander felt the hooks in the words. He hated that they knew him. He hated that they were right. The longing in his chest, the emptiness behind his ribs twitched like a wound being pressed. But he was Homelander. He was the strongest thing he had ever met. He had crushed tanks. He had broken men with a glance. He had ended lives like turning off a light. These were just monsters. Ugly things. Pretenders. He moved first. He shot forward, a blur of red and gold. His fist caught the nearest demon and drove through it, tearing flesh that was not flesh, splashing ichor that smelled like burnt sugar and iron. The creature burst apart in a spray of impossible color. He did not stop. He grabbed another by the throat and squeezed until the spine snapped, until the head twisted too far, until the laughter became a wet gargle. He incinerated a third with his eyes, a beam of heat and hate that carved it into ash that screamed as it scattered. The demons recoiled, not in fear but in delight. Their forms burst and reformed, like dreams changing shape when you try to remember them. They clapped with clawed hands. They cheered like an audience at a show. Yes, yes, one shrieked. That is it. Show us the rage. Show us the hunger. Show us the part of you that wants to be seen. Homelander froze for a fraction of a second, thrown off balance by the wrong reaction. On Earth, violence had always been punctuation. Here it was entertainment. He attacked again, faster, harder. He tore through them like a storm through paper. Limbs flew, wings shredded, faces melted. He punched a hole through a torso and watched it smile as it died. They kept laughing. Not one begged, not one pleaded. Not one looked at him with the wide-eyed terror he needed, the terror that made him real. Their amusement was a mirror held up to his ego, and the reflection was ugly. He felt something shift beneath his victories, a wrongness, a sense that the rules of consequence had been rewritten. Every time he destroyed one, it dissolved into the warp like foam into water. The essence did not vanish. It flowed back into the sea around them, and from that sea, new shapes began to form. Endless, he realized. Not an army, a tide. His breathing quickened, not from exertion, from insult. From the dawning truth that strength alone did not grant authority here. You could kill all day and still be nothing. A voice deeper than the rest rolled across the warp like thunder under the ocean. It did not belong to a demon. It belonged to something that used demons like fingers. Little king, it said, and the words tasted like rust. You have worn worship like clothing. Do you know what it is to be worship? Do you know what it is to be needed by the universe itself? Homelander spun, trying to find the source. There was no source, only presence, a weight on existence. a sense of vast attention turning slowly, like a planet shifting its gaze. His skin crawled. His pride flared, desperate to cover the fear. "I am not little," he snarled. The warp answered with laughter again, but now it was not only the demons. It was the space between them. It was the colors bending. It was the currents of nightmare. He struck at another demon, tearing it apart, and watched its pieces dissolve into glittering smoke. The smoke swirled, and in it he saw a vision brief and sharp. A throne made of skulls, a palace of excess, a garden of rot, a labyrinth of endless change. The images were not offers. They were reminders. This place had owners. The demons drifted closer again, unhurried. Their eyes gleamed with the joy of predators who know their prey is strong enough to make the chase interesting. "We are not impressed," one whispered close to his ear. "We have seen Sun scream." "We are amused," another said, stroking the air like it was stroking his cheek. "You think you are a god because you can kill. Here, killing is a language everyone speaks." Homelander's fists trembled. For the first time, he could not tell if his anger was power or panic. He looked around at the endless swirling warp, at the laughter that did not stop, at the sense of being watched by something vast and hungry, and he understood the worst part. He was not the invader here. He was the entertainment. The warp did not let him stay in its open ocean forever. It was not kind enough to grant him that slow drowning. Instead, it spat him out like a joke finished, flinging him through a tunnel of screaming color that collapsed behind him with the sound of a door slamming shut. He fell again, but this time there was gravity, there was direction, there was a sky that knew what it was supposed to be. A bruised sky, choked with smoke, stitched with distant fire. He crashed through clouds and ash and the stench of burning industry. For a heartbeat he saw the world below, a city that did not end, a hive of metal and stone stacked into a mountain of human desperation. Spires rose like knives. Hab blocks crowded like sores. The streets were veins full of ants. Then he hit. Concrete shattered. Steel screamed. The impact dug a crater into a street already cracked by war. Dust and rubble billowed up, and for a moment the only sound was the distant thunder of bombardment and the closer, startled silence of people who had learned that silence usually meant death. Homelander rose from the crater slowly. He shook dust from his shoulders like a man brushing off inconvenience. His cape unfurled, red against gray, a bright wound in a world that had forgotten color. He looked around and felt the air of this place. It was heavy with misery. It tasted of soot, oil, and old prayer. The humans nearby were thin, wrapped in rags and worn uniforms. Their eyes were wide, not with the excitement of fans, but with the stunned terror of peasants watching a comet land in their street. He heard their whispers before they became words. "Emperor, save us." Their language was rough, edged with superstition. But the pattern was familiar. They were searching for a story that could explain why they were still alive. Homelander's chest tightened. The warp had laughed at him. It had made him small. And here, in this ruined street, the old feeling returned like warmth creeping back into numb fingers. They were looking at him the way he needed. He floated up a few feet, just enough to show them the miracle. Their breath caught. Knees hit the ground. Foreheads touched ash. Some cried. Some laughed hysterically. Some simply stared, eyes watering as if looking at him hurt. In the distance, the war came closer. He could hear it now. Gunfire, but heavier than anything he knew. Explosions that shook the bones. A roar of voices chanting something ugly. Cultists, he realized before he saw them. The warp stink on their souls. Their hearts beat wrong, excited by terror. They poured through an avenue like a flood, waving crude banners, firing weapons that spat sparks and smoke. Behind them, something else moved. A hulking shape, green skin broad as a truck, laughing as it ran. Orcs, his mind supplied not from knowledge, but from the way the universe wanted him to understand what it threw at him. And above, tearing through the smoke like living shrapnel, winged things screamed. Demons again, smaller, meaner, darting in packs. The humans around him whimpered. Some tried to run. Most did not have the energy. Homelander watched the tide of enemies and felt the simplest emotion in the world. Relief. Here was a problem he could solve with his hands. Here was a stage that would respond correctly to violence. Here was a chance to rewrite the humiliation of the warp with the language he spoke best. He moved. He shot forward like a bullet, crossing the street in a heartbeat. The first cultist did not even see him. Homelander's fist hit the man's chest and turned ribs into dust. The body flew back and hit a wall with a wet crack. He kept going, weaving through them, tearing, breaking, burning. His heat vision carved lines of white fire through ranks of bodies, severing limbs, turning flesh to ash. He grabbed a fanatic by the face and slammed him into the ground until the street ran red. The cultists tried to shoot him. Their bullets sparked against his skin. They might as well have been throwing gravel. Then an orc charged him, swinging a crude axe that could have split a car. Homelander caught the blade in one hand. The impact rattled his arm, heavier than he expected. The orc grinned, delighted to meet resistance. Homelander leaned in, eyes cold. He punched the orc's jaw upward hard enough to snap the neck and lift the creature off its feet. The green brute crashed down and did not rise. The other orcs howled, not in fear but in excitement. They surged toward him like children running toward fireworks. Homelander flew up, then down, and the impact of his landing shattered three of them at once. He tore one in half and used the severed torso like a club. He laughed, and the laugh surprised even him. Above, the demons swooped. They shrieked promises and curses. One raked claws across his back, and the pain was a thin line, more insult than injury. Homelander twisted and caught it by the wing, then ripped the wing free. The demon dissolved into smoke, screaming as it vanished. The battle became a blur of brutality. He was faster than their eyes, stronger than their bones, brighter than their fire. He became a red and gold comet in a gray apocalypse, and wherever he went, the enemy broke. The humans watched from broken doorways and shattered windows, mouths open. They saw a thing that should not exist in their world. A warrior who did not bleed, who did not tire, who moved like a legend. Their fear turned into something else, something dangerous. They began to shout. Not his name because they did not know it. They shouted titles. Angel of the Imp, Avenging Saint, the Light. Their voices were thin, ragged, but the sound spread through the streets like a spark catching dry cloth. Homelander heard it and felt the emptiness in him fill, just a little, with their belief. It was not love, but it was close enough to taste. He drifted above the battlefield when it was done, hovering over bodies and smoke. The street was littered with broken cultists, dead orcs, scorch marks. The humans below stared up at him like he was the first sunrise they had ever seen. A woman, face smeared with ash, crawled forward and lifted a trembling hand. "Thank you," she whispered, and the words were a prayer. Homelander landed gently in front of her. He let her touch his boot. He let her feel the solidity of him. The crowd gasped as if witnessing a sacrament. He smiled, softer this time, and it felt almost real. "You are safe now," he said, and the lie was beautiful. He did not know where he was. He did not know what this Imperium was, what emperor they kept invoking. But he knew the shape of devotion when he saw it. He knew how to stand in it and make it grow. The city around them groaned, a dying giant. Far away, sirens wailed. Somewhere above the clouds, ships battled, their contrails like scars. This world was under siege, and in that siege, a new myth had just been born. Word traveled fast in a hive city, faster than light sometimes, carried by desperation. Within hours, more civilians gathered, drawn by rumors. Within a day, whole hab blocks whispered about the angel in red and gold who tore the enemy apart with his bare hands. They brought offerings, scraps of food, candles, small icons of the emperor placed at his feet as if he were a shrine. Some tried to kiss his cape. Some tried to confess their sins, babbling like children. Homelander drank it in. He let it wash the warp's laughter out of his ears. He let their eyes rebuild the version of himself he liked best. But in the cold distances beyond the hive, other eyes were watching too. Eyes that did not worship miracles. Eyes that cataloged them. In this galaxy, an unauthorized god was not a blessing. It was a problem. And the Imperium did not solve problems with applause. The first sign that the world had noticed him was the change in the air. It happened quietly. The civilians who had clustered around him began to back away, not from him, but from something above. Their prayers turned into frantic murmurs. Their eyes flicked to the sky as if the sky had teeth. Homelander followed their gaze. Dropships descended through smoke, black silhouettes cutting the clouds. They moved with purpose, not panic. Their engines roared like predators. Symbols marked their hulls, skulls, and wings, purity seals fluttering like dead leaves. Even from a distance they felt heavy, ancient, convinced of their own righteousness. The humans around him fell to their knees again, but this time the devotion was different. This was fear dressed as obedience. The Emperor, they whispered, as if the word itself might protect them. Homelander floated upward to meet the newcomers, cape streaming behind him. He wanted to be seen. He wanted to establish the hierarchy before they could try. The dropships landed with brutal precision, crushing debris under their weight. Ramps lowered, and then the Space Marines emerged. They were not like soldiers on Earth. They were not men in armor. They were walking monuments. 8 feet tall, broader than any human should be, clad in ceramite plates painted in grim colors, each one marked with heraldry that looked like it had survived 10,000 years of war. Their helmets were skull-faced, their lenses glowing. Their bolters were not rifles. They were cannons built for a different scale of violence. They spread out in disciplined silence, weapons raised, forming a ring around the street like a closing fist. Behind them came smaller figures in black coats, robed officials with augmetic eyes and parchment hanging from their armor. Inquisitorial symbols gleamed, sharp and absolute. Homelander hovered above them, looking down like a king inspecting a guard. He expected awe. He expected at least hesitation. The Marines did not look up with wonder. They looked up like hunters measuring prey. A voice boomed through a Vox speaker, distorted, cold. Identify yourself. State your allegiance. Submit to Imperial authority. Homelander laughed. The sound echoed off ruined buildings. Imperial authority. He had heard authority spoken like that before, by men who believed paperwork could bind a god. I am Homelander, he said, letting the name ring. And you are in my way. The Marines did not respond with anger. They responded with procedure. Their leader, marked by a different helm, raised a hand slightly. The ring tightened. Homelander felt the civilians behind him trembling. He could taste their fear shifting from him to the Marines. That irritated him. Worship was a fragile thing. It needed to be defended. He dropped lower, close enough that the Marine's armor filled his vision. Up close he could smell incense and oil and something like old blood. He could hear their hearts, slow, controlled, like machines pretending to be flesh. You should kneel, he said, voice soft, dangerous. Everyone kneeled. A bolt round cracked the air. It did not sound like a gunshot. It sounded like a small explosion. The shell hit his shoulder and detonated, tearing his suit, ripping skin, sprang a thin mist of red. Homelander froze. For a moment the world went quiet in his head. The civilians gasped. The Marines' bolters remained steady. Another bolt round slammed into his chest, detonating with a punch of force that drove him back. Pain bloomed, sharp and real. Not deep, not lethal, but undeniable. He looked down at the torn fabric, at the blood seeping through. His blood. He had bled before, in private, in controlled circumstances, in places where no one could see. But this was different. This was public. This was someone drawing his blood without begging permission. Rage surged up like a tidal wave. He screamed and lunged, moving faster than the humans could track, aiming to rip the Marine leader's head off. The Marines moved too. They were not fast like him. They were fast like trained brutality. Bolters roared in unison, a wall of detonations hammering his body. Explosions walked across his ribs, his arms, his legs. The impacts staggered him, forced him to adjust, forced him to acknowledge that this was not a crowd of helpless admirers. He slammed into the leader anyway, grabbing the Marine by the throat. Ceramite resisted his grip, but it cracked. The Marine's boots dragged grooves in the street as Homelander lifted him. The Marine did not panic. Even as armor fractured, the transhuman inside did not beg. It raised a combat knife and drove it into Homelander's forearm. The blade bit shallow but sharp. More blood. Homelander's eyes widened, fury mixing with something else. He crushed harder. The Marine's throat collapsed with a crunch. The body went limp. The ring of Marines did not break. They did not retreat to mourn. They adjusted formation. They fired again, methodical. Their discipline was its own kind of cruelty. It said, your life is not special. Your death will be handled like any other. Homelander blasted heat vision, sweeping it across them. The beam scorched armor, melted paint, turned one Marine's chest plate red hot. The Marine staggered but did not fall. Another Marine stepped into place, bolter still firing. Behind the Marines, the robed figures watched. One raised a staff etched with sigils. Homelander felt a pressure in his skull, like invisible hands trying to pry open his thoughts. He snarled and pushed back, but the pressure lingered, probing. Warp adjacent, a voice murmured through Vox Clinical. Possible demon host, possible psyker manifestation, high instability. Homelander heard the words and understood the tone. This was not negotiation. This was classification. Containment protocols initiated, the voice continued. Target to be restrained for examination. If resistance escalates, authorization for termination pending. Termination. They spoke about killing him the way a man speaks about taking out trash. Something cold settled in Homelander's stomach. Not fear yet. Not fully. But a crack. He wanted to slaughter them. He could. But the civilians were watching, and their worship was fragile, and the Marines were not afraid, and the robed figures were reaching into his mind with invisible knives. For the first time since arriving, he felt the galaxy's true shape, not a stage. A machine. And machines did not worship. They processed. He fled upward, breaking the ring by force, smashing through a dropship's wings, sending it spiraling into rubble. Bolter fire chased him like angry sparks, but he was already gone, a bright streak vanishing into smoke. He landed miles away in a ruined manufactorum where the air tasted of metal and old death. He stood among broken machines and hanging chains, listening to the distant war, listening to the pounding of his own heart. His wounds closed slowly, but the memory stayed open. The shock of it, the humiliation. He clenched his fists until the floor creaked under his boots. They were not like humans on Earth. They had not looked at him with awe. They had looked at him like a file entry. His eyes burned. His throat felt tight. He hated that he wanted to scream, not at them, but at the universe. And then the warp returned, not as a rift, but as a whisper. It seeped into the cracks of the world. It curled around the edges of his anger. It spoke in the language of temptation, soft and patient, like a lover who knows you will eventually answer. Homelander, it murmured, and the way it said his name felt intimate. Not like a fan, like a thing that had been inside his thoughts for years. He spun, heat vision ready, but there was nothing to burn. Only shadows shifting in the corners of the manufactorum, only the sense of presence thickening like fog. You were hurt, the whisper said. You were insulted. They denied your divinity. Homelander's jaw tightened. Shut up. A chuckle warm and cruel. We do not offer silence. We offer truth. The air shimmered and visions began to form, not in front of his eyes, but inside them. He saw himself on a throne, but not the cheap throne of a corporate boardroom. A throne of worlds, planets hanging like ornaments. Armies kneeling in endless ranks, chanting his name until the sound became the background hum of reality. Tinche, a voice like turning pages, breathed. You crave meaning. A destiny greater than your staged heroism. I can write you into fate. You will never be a product again. You will be a plan. Slaanesh, a sigh like silk against skin, whispered. You crave adoration, not the shallow clapping of frightened crowds. Real devotion. A galaxy that cannot stop looking at you. I can make you feel full. Corn, a roar like steel on bone, thundered. You crave war. The honest kind, not corporate theatrics. Real battle. Real blood. A place where strength is the only law. I can give you endless enemies and endless victories. Nurgle, a wet, gentle chuckle, oozed. You crave not to be alone. You fear the quiet. I can make you eternal. Not as a statue, but as a family. You will never be abandoned. You will never have to earn love again. The voices overlapped, a chorus of monstrous offerings, each one shaped around the wound in him. Homelander's breathing slowed, not because he was calm, but because the temptation hit too close. He had always told himself he wanted power. He had always acted like power was the goal. But standing in this dead factory, listening to God speak to him like he mattered, he felt the deeper truth. He wanted to be chosen, not as a weapon, not as a brand, not as a threat, chosen as a son, as something worthy of affection without performance. The warp knew it. It leaned into it. We can give you what they never did, Slaanesh whispered. Touch that does not flinch. Eyes that do not hide fear behind worship. A love that consumes you and never lets go. Homelander swallowed. His pride screamed at him to reject it. But his loneliness, old and rotted, whispered back. He imagined it, a galaxy that looked at him without fear, a galaxy that offered him devotion willingly, not because of cameras, not because of propaganda, because they wanted him. His hands trembled. Then another vision. A mirror held up by Tsad. In it he saw himself as a god, but the god was wrong. The eyes were empty. The smile was too wide. The worshippers below were not people. They were broken things, screaming as they praised him, their love twisted into addiction and despair. He recoiled, disgusted. He did not want that kind of worship. He wanted something clean, something honest, something impossible. The warp laughed softly. That is the joke, it said. You want love without cost, love without weakness, love without the risk of being seen. Korn's voice snarled. Then take it, conquer, make them love you through fear. That is the only love that lasts. Homelander's eyes flashed. I do not want fear. The silence that followed was heavy. Even the gods seemed to pause, intrigued. You do not want fear, Nurgle murmured almost kindly. Yet you have built your whole life on it. Homelander's throat tightened again. The truth stung. On Earth, he had been worshipped because people feared what would happen if they did not. He had called it love because admitting otherwise would have broken him. Here, the warp did not let him lie so easily. The gods pressed in, not physically but emotionally, like pressure on a bruise. Accept, Sinch urged. Be rewritten. Become inevitable. Accept, Slaanesh purred. Be adored until you cannot remember emptiness. Accept, Khorne roared. Spill blood until the universe respects you. Accept, Nurgle hummed. Be held forever, even if the hold is decay. Homelander closed his eyes. For a moment, he wanted to say yes just to stop the aching, just to stop feeling like a lost child in a universe that had no place for him. But then he remembered the bolter round, the blood, the way the Marines had not cared, the way the warp had laughed. If he accepted, he would become someone else's toy, someone else's story. He had been a product once. He would not become a puppet again, not even for gods. He opened his eyes and stared into the shadows. I am not yours, he said, voice low. The warp's laughter returned, but now it was amused in a different way, not mocking. Oh, it whispered. You are not untempted. You are simply picky. The presence of the gods withdrew slightly, like predators deciding to watch longer. The air felt colder. The manufactorum seemed larger, emptier. Before the whispers faded, Slaanesh spoke one last time, soft as a kiss. You do not want godhood, little star. You want love. The words hit him harder than any bolter. They named the wound. They stripped away the armor. Homelander stood alone among dead machines, and for a moment he hated the gods more than he had hated Vought, because the gods had seen him, and seeing him did not make them gentle. It made them hungry. They did not give him long to brood. The Imperium moved like a machine once it decided a thing needed to be removed. He felt it in the sky first, the rumble of engines, the distant pulse of Vox chatter, the subtle tightening of the world as patrols shifted. He left the manufactorum before they could surround it. He flew low over the hive's endless sprawl, weaving between spires, listening to the city's prayers and screams. He wanted a place to breathe. There was no place. The whole planet felt like a lung filled with ash. Then he saw them, not the regular Marines from before. These were different. Their armor was cleaner, darker, inscribed with sigils that made his eyes itch. Their presence felt wrong, like they carried a cold flame that burned the warp itself. They moved in silence, coordinated beyond speech. Grey Knights, his instincts whispered, even if he did not know the name. Or something like them, something built to kill what should not exist. They intercepted him in the air. A squad rose on jump packs, arcs of fire pushing them upward. They did not chase like desperate men. They rose like executioners stepping onto a scaffold. Homelander stopped midair, hovering. He forced a smile. You again, he called down. Do you ever stop bothering me? No answer. Only bolters raised. Their rounds were different. The shells glowed faintly, etched with symbols. When they struck him, the explosions did not only hurt his flesh. They stung his mind like the impact carried a prayer that rejected him. He grunted, thrown back. Pain spiked behind his eyes. His skin blistered where the rounds hit, and the burns did not close immediately. He snarled and dove. He hit the first Grey Knight with enough force to smash both of them into a spire. Stone and metal shattered. The Marine bounced off rubble and landed hard, armor dented. Homelander grabbed him, trying to rip the helm off. The Marine drove a force weapon upward, not a blade so much as an idea of a blade, humming with psychic pressure. It grazed Homelander's cheek and the cut burned like acid, refusing to heal. Homelander reeled, hand flying to his face. Blood on his fingers again. He lashed out, punching the Marine's chest plate until it cracked and caved. The Grey Knight did not scream. He only whispered something through Vox, a litany steady as a heartbeat. The others surrounded Homelander in midair, using jump packs to reposition with brutal efficiency. Bolter fire hammered him from different angles. Their shots pushed him, controlled his movement, herded him like a beast. Homelander roared and unleashed heat vision in a wide sweep. The beams cut through smoke, slicing chunks from spires, forcing the knights to scatter. One took a direct hit. Armor glowed, then melted. The Marine fell, a burning comet slamming into the streets far below. Homelander felt a savage satisfaction. Then the Marine stood up again. Damaged, smoking, but standing. The sight hit Homelander like a slap. On Earth, that would have been the end. Here it was merely a phase. A larger figure rose from behind a spire, moving upward without jump packs, as if gravity itself respected him. His armor was ornate, heavy, gilded in places that caught the dim light. A spear in his hand gleamed with authority. Custods, Homelander thought, without knowing why, only feeling the weight of the thing. The figure did not speak. He simply advanced, and the air seemed to stiffen around him. Homelander's instinct screamed. Not fear yet. Not running. But a primal awareness that this was not a soldier. This was the Imperium's answer to gods. Homelander charged, trying to end it quickly. He slammed into the Custods, driving them both through a wall. The building collapsed around them in a roar of debris. Inside the dust, Homelander swung again and again, fists blurring, each punch meant to pulp organs and shatter bone. The Custods absorbed it, armor cracking only slightly, moving with a calm that felt insulting. Then the spear struck. It pierced Homelander's side, sliding between ribs with terrifying ease. Pain flared, white and screaming. Homelander gasped, shock flashing through him. The spear twisted, not just cutting flesh, but carrying a pressure that felt like judgment. Homelander grabbed the shaft, trying to pull it out. The Custods leaned in, helm close, and for the first time spoke, voice low, absolute. Abomination. The word was not an insult. It was a verdict. Homelander screamed and ripped the spear free, blood pouring. He slammed his palm into the Custod's helm, denting it, then followed with heat vision at point-blank range. The beam hit, and for a moment the Custod's armor glowed like the heart of a furnace. The figure staggered, smoke pouring from joints. Homelander did not stop. He drove forward, grabbing the Custods and flying upward, blasting through the roof into open air. He spun and hurled the transhuman downward, watching the armored body crash into the street like a meteor. The Grey Knights surged in again, chanting through Vox, their words a net of psychic resistance. Homelander felt their chants scrape against his ego, against the part of him that had always believed he was unquestionable. He roared back, not with words but with violence. He tore one knight out of the air and snapped his spine. He seized another and used him as a shield against the bolter barrage, then threw the broken body aside. But the fighting was different now. Not a performance, not a power fantasy. A struggle. Homelander's wounds piled up, shallow but numerous, each one a reminder that this galaxy could hurt him. His breathing grew ragged. His suit was torn, stained, no longer a clean symbol. Still he fought. Because stopping meant admitting the illusion was dead. At last, through sheer brutality and stubborn will, he broke the squad. Bodies, some dissolved into the chaos of war below. The Custods did not rise again, but Homelander could not tell if that meant victory or delay. He hovered above the ruin, bleeding, shaking with adrenaline. The city below was a sea of smoke and distant screams. The sky above was full of ships that did not care about him personally, only about what he represented. Homelander looked at his own blood dripping into the ash. He had won, barely, and the lesson was not comfort. It was terror, creeping in around the edges of his pride. In this galaxy there were warriors bred to kill gods, and he was not even a real one. He tried to rebuild the worship anyway. It was instinct. It was hunger. After the gray nights, after the spear, after the word abomination, he needed the old drug more than ever. He flew to other districts, other hab towers, other desperate crowds. He arrived like lightning and tore apart whatever enemy forces he found. Cultists died. Orcs died. Demons scattered back into smoke. Humans watched, and the story spread again. A new saint, they whispered. A new angel. Not sanctioned, not named in any holy text, but here, undeniable. Homelander let them gather. He let them chant. He let them build shrines out of scrap metal and candles. He let them paint crude murals of him on cracked walls, red and gold against soot. He stood before them, smiling, soaking in their devotion like sunlight. For a few days it almost worked. The hive's misery had a focal point now. Hope clustered around him, fragile but bright. Then the Imperium answered with something that did not feel like a squad or a spear. It felt like fate. The sky changed. The distant battle noise faded under a deeper rumble, like the planet itself groaning. Clouds parted in unnatural patterns. The light dimmed, not because the sun moved, but because something vast eclipsed it. People looked up. Their prayers turned to screams. A fleet hung above the hive, black shapes blotting out stars. Orbital platforms rotated into firing alignment. The air itself seemed to tighten, as if the world was holding its breath. Homelander rose into the sky to meet it, anger and dread mixing. He could see the ships now, immense, ancient, bristling with guns that looked like they were built to kill continents. A Vox transmission cut through the air, amplified, cold echoing across the hive. By order of the Holy Ordos, by authority of the God Emperor of mankind, this world is declared tainted. Exterminatus is authorized. The word hit the hive like a death sentence spoken in a language everyone understood. Humans on the streets sobbed, begged, collapsed. Some screamed at the sky, accusing their emperor, accusing their gods, accusing the universe. Others simply went still, as if their souls had already left. Homelander stared upward, confused in a way that felt childish. They cannot, he whispered. They cannot kill their own. The fleet did not respond. A streak of light descended from orbit, not a missile, not a shell, something worse. It hit the hive in the distance, and the horizon blossomed into fire. A pillar of heat rose, white and roaring, a sun being born on the ground. The shockwave reached Homelander seconds later, slamming into him, buffeting him in the air. Below, buildings crumpled like paper. Streets cracked. People vanished in heat and pressure, erased so quickly that their screams did not have time to become sound. Homelander flew downward, instinct screaming to protect, to stop it, to do something. He blasted toward the fleet, heat vision slicing at the void shields, trying to burn through. The beam splashed harmlessly against shimmering barriers. He slammed into the shield like a man punching a wall of glass that never breaks. His body bounced back, stunned. His hands pressed against the invisible barrier, fingers splayed like a child begging. "Stop!" he shouted, voice lost in the void. "They worship me. They are mine." The ships remained silent, or perhaps their silence was the answer. Your worship is irrelevant. Your existence is contamination. More fire rained down. The hive became a furnace. Districts vanished under blooming explosions. Whole spires toppled, glowing red, collapsing into seas of flame. Billions of lives compressed into a few hours of extinction. Homelander flew frantically along the edge of the inferno, trying to snatch people from streets, from collapsing buildings. He grabbed a handful, carried them to shelter, only to watch the shelter become a crater seconds later. He ripped open a sealed transit tunnel, dragging civilians out, only for the air to ignite as oxygen met heat. The people screamed his name now, not in worship, but in desperate accusation. "Save us," they cried. "Angels, save us. Why are you letting this happen?" Homelander's mind snapped between rage and horror. He was doing everything. He was the strongest. He was supposed to be able to fix things. That was the point of him. But the scale was wrong. The galaxy had brought a hammer meant for worlds, and his fists were suddenly small. A woman he had spoken to days ago, one of his first worshippers, stumbled toward him through ash. Her skin was blistered. Her eyes were wild. She reached for him with shaking hands. Homelander grabbed her, lifting her, ready to fly her away. Then another blast hit nearby. The air turned into fire. The woman's body convulsed in his arms, and then she was gone, reduced to char and bone before he could even understand she was dying. Homelander screamed, a sound ripped from his throat, pure rage and grief and disbelief. He looked at the ashes on his gloves, the remains of worship, the remains of proof that he had mattered to someone. He flew upward again, toward the fleet, toward the void shields, toward the indifferent guns. He hammered the barrier again and again until his knuckles split, until blood floated in droplets in the thin upper air. No applause answered him. No one in orbit cared that he was furious. No one cared that he was a god on his own world. Exterminatus was not personal. It was policy. The final strike came like judgment. A wave of fire rolled across the hive, consuming everything. The sky turned red. The ground became a glowing sea. The city that had offered him worship became a tomb of molten metal and ash. Homelander survived. His skin blistered. His lungs burned. His eyes watered from smoke that could not kill him but could still hurt. He hovered above the ruin, shaking, watching the last of the shrines vanish under the fire. The fleet remained above for a time, ensuring the world was dead. Then, slowly, it began to move away, like a man walking away from a mess he has cleaned. Homelander watched it go. No applause, no memorial, no cámara, just silence, and the realization that the galaxy had erased his congregation in seconds, as if they had never existed. And the worst part was not the death. The worst part was how easy it had been for the universe to forget him. After the firestorm, the warp grew quiet around him, not because it was gone, but because it was listening. The gods had offered. He had refused. Now they watched, curious whether his refusal would break into desperation. The Imperium did not stop either. Exterminatus had not been the end. It had been a statement. The fleet moved on to other wars, but the machine left behind orders, signals, hunters. Homelander drifted through space briefly, forced up by heat and debris, then descended onto another world, another conflict zone, another place where humans died in piles too large to count. He kept fighting, because fighting was the only thing he could do without thinking. He struck at cults, at orc raiding parties, at demon incursions. He tore through them with the same brutal efficiency as before. But something had changed. He listened more now. He scanned the skies before he landed. He counted the shapes of ships. He watched for the particular darkness of gray knight armor, for the gleam of a spear that could hurt him. He began to feel the difference between winning a battle and surviving a war. The demons returned, not as merchants this time, but as tormentors. They appeared when he was alone in the ruins after a fight, when the smoke cleared and the screams faded. They did not always attack. Sometimes they just watched, grinning, letting him know he was still being measured by things older than stars. Khorne sent champions that roared for his skull. Homelander fought them and won, but the victories left him bruised, cut, tired in a way he had never been on Earth. Slaanesh sent visions of adoration, beautiful crowds, soft hands, voices calling him beloved, and then ripped the visions away, leaving him in cold mud surrounded by corpses. Tissan sent riddles in the form of coincidences, soldiers who smiled strangely, civilians who spoke like prophets for a moment, hinting that his path was already written, that his rebellion was part of a plan. Nurgle sent plagues that did not touch his body but touched the worlds around him, making him watch entire populations rot slowly, begging for mercy, offering love through their suffering. The gods were patient. They did not need him today. They could wait. Hunger was eternal. Meanwhile, the Imperium tightened the net. On some worlds he felt astropaths scream his presence into the void. He heard Vox channels whisper about a rogue warp predator, a false angel, an unknown Xenos, an unstable entity. He began to realize they would never stop. On Earth, consequences had been personal. Here, consequences were institutional. He was not a scandal to manage. He was an anomaly to erase. The first time he ran, it happened without drama. He was on a battlefield of broken tanks and burning trenches, tearing apart a chaos war band. He was winning. He had always won. But then he sensed it, a cold pressure, like a knife of prayer cutting through the air. Gray night. They appeared at the edge of the fight, moving with the calm certainty of men who had already decided the ending. Their bolters fired, glowing rounds, striking him with that same mind-stinging pain. Homelander hesitated only a fraction. The hesitation was enough. A psychic wave hit him, a force of will, a denial. His vision blurred. The world tilted. For a heartbeat, he felt his own identity wobble, as if the universe was asking him to prove he deserved to exist. He roared and blasted heat vision, trying to carve space between them. The beam hit a shimmering barrier and dispersed. He felt the spear again, not in his flesh yet, but in his memory. The humiliation of blood, the ash of worshippers, the indifference of orbiting guns. His heart hammered. The fear arrived, not as a scream, but as a cold calculation. If he stayed, he might die. The thought was new enough to make him dizzy. He flew upward, breaking away, leaving the battlefield unfinished. Leaving humans behind, leaving enemies alive. He ran. The sky swallowed him, and the gray nights did not chase immediately. They did not need to. They would find him again. They always did. Homelander flew until his lungs burned, until the horizon curved, until he was high enough to see the world as a wounded sphere. He hovered there, shaking, looking down at the war below, at the tiny lives he had abandoned, at the tiny lives that had once worshipped him and then been erased by Exterminatus. He realized the cruel inversion of his existence. He was still powerful, still terrifying, still able to slaughter armies. But now he knew there were things that could hurt him, things that could kill him, and things that would erase whole worlds just to remove the stain of his presence. He had wanted a universe that would finally show him what godhood looked like. It had shown him something else. A universe where even gods could be hunted. And in the quiet above the planet, with no applause to anchor him, Homelander finally admitted the truth he had been running from since the first laugh in the warp. He was afraid. He stopped trying to build churches. Not because the hunger died, but because the lesson had carved itself too deep. Every shrine was a target. Every gathering of worshippers was a beacon. Every hopeful chant was an invitation for orbital fire. So he became a moving shadow, a bright thing that refused to stay bright for long. He drifted from war zone to war zone, following noise the way a starving animal follows scent. Sometimes he arrived in time to save a convoy of refugees, ripping apart raiders and carrying survivors to hidden tunnels. The refugees would look at him with the beginnings of devotion, and he would feel the familiar warmth start to rise. Then he would leave before it could become dangerous. Other times he arrived already angry, already hollow, and the first army he saw became an outlet. Imperial patrols, chaos cultists, orc mobs, it blurred. He tore through them with a violence that felt less like heroism and more like self-harm. He would stand afterward in the smoke, breathing hard, blood drying on his hands, and feel nothing but the echo of the warp's laughter. Stories followed him anyway. In a galaxy this large, myths breed like bacteria. The Imperium called him different names in different sectors. Rogue war predator, unclassified abomination, false angel. Some whispered he was a demon that hunted other demons. Some claimed he was a saint punished for pride. Most commanders simply marked him on threat charts and sent reports up the chain. Chaos spoke of him too briefly. A strange morsel that did not rot properly. A would-be god who refused to kneel. Demons sought him out for sport, but over time even they grew bored. He did not fall into their arms. He did not rise into their ranks. He remained stubbornly himself, and in the warp, stubbornness without destiny is just another flavor that fades. The gods' whispers became less frequent. Not because they were kind, but because they had infinite distractions. Whole civilizations screamed into their sea every moment. A single lonely superhuman was not worth constant attention. That abandonment should have been a relief. It was not. On Earth, even hatred had been attention. Even fear had been proof that he mattered. Here, he began to taste the worst possibility: insignificance. He wandered across a battlefield on a dead moon, boots crunching on frozen corpses. The stars above were sharp and indifferent. In the distance, Imperial artillery traded fire with a chaos fortress, the explosions tiny against the void. Homelander stood between both sides, not joining either, just listening. He could hear human hearts beating inside armored shells, could hear prayers whispered through vox, could hear screams from the wounded. It was all the same song, repeated across millions of worlds. He had wanted to be the chorus. Instead, he was background noise. He thought about the boy he had been, trapped behind glass, learning that love was something other people got. He thought about the man he had become, building himself out of applause and threat. He thought about the brief days on the hive world when people had looked at him with genuine hope, when their eyes had made him feel almost real. Then he thought about the fire from orbit. The way those same eyes had turned to ash without ceremony. He could not decide which memory hurt more, the hope or the erasure. A small group of civilians appeared at the edge of the battlefield, moving like ghosts carrying a wounded child. They saw him and froze. Their eyes widened. Fear first, then recognition, then the fragile spark of belief. Homelander felt the old hunger rise. He took a step toward them. The child whimpered. The mother tightened her grip, ready to run. Homelander stopped. He could have smiled. He could have said, "You are safe." He could have played the role. But the role felt heavy now, like armor that no longer fit. He turned away. He flew off into the dark without a word, leaving them alive, leaving them confused, leaving the spark of worship unlit. He told himself it was mercy. He told himself it was caution. The truth was simpler. He could not bear to watch another congregation die for loving him. So he became something else. A lone war entity passing through, sometimes saving, sometimes slaughtering, never staying long enough to be named properly. A bright streak on Auspex screens. A rumor in trenches. A curse among commanders. The Imperium continued to hunt him, but even their machine had limits. A galaxy at war has only so much attention to spare. Some sectors marked him as a low-priority anomaly. Others filed him under unresolved. The paperwork grew, the wars continued, and he slipped through the cracks like a ghost. Chaos forgot him more completely. Without devotion, without surrender, without a grand fall, he was not a trophy. He was an irritation that drifted away. In the end, Homelander remained what he had always feared becoming, even on Earth, even at the height of his fame. Powerful and completely alone. He flew through the void between worlds, cape trailing behind him like a torn banner. And for the first time, there was no audience in his mind. No cheering crowd. No God whispering. No empire applauding. Only the quiet vastness of a universe that did not care. And somewhere in that quiet, deeper than rage, deeper than pride, a small, bitter understanding took root. He had finally found a place where he could be a god. And it was the place that proved he never truly was one.